I mentioned in our last segment that Wednesday, November 25th, 2020, would go down in infamy as the modern day equivalent of the day General George Washington crossed the Delaware, which was a turning point in the Revolutionary War on December 25th, 1776. You see, at that point, everybody believed that the Continental Army, General Washington, and the new republic, well, that it was done. That it was over. That, well, there was no future. And that the British would reign supreme, a powerhouse, that could not be defeated. But General Washington and his Continental Army, that ragtag group of soldiers, undersupplied, undernourished, underpaid, under tremendous stress. On December 25th, 1776, crossed the Delaware. And then they took on the Hessians in Trenton. And it was the turning point of the Revolutionary War. And I truly believe November 25th, 2020 will be seen in decades to come by historians that it was the day that the war turned in the favor of the freedom-loving patriots against the deep state. You know, it's interesting. My mom, who was a history teacher, taught me the lesson of the importance of General Washington crossing the Delaware. An event that I think if we go to most high schools and middle schools and elementary schools is not presented or discussed. But there's something else my mom taught me, and she had me read a book when I was a freshman in high school, a book I really didn't want to read, called The Art of War by Sun Tzu. And I remember when she brought me the book and she said, "You're going to read this now. This is your reading assignment." And I looked at it and I go, "Mom, why am I reading about this guy Sun Tzu?" She said, "Because he was the most tactical, strategic, and fearless warrior possibly in our world's history, even more so than even Alexander the Great." He said, "You need to read about him and learn from him." At the time, I looked at my dad and I said, and I kind of looked at my dad and he looked at me and goes, "David, after your mother and I got married, it was the first book she had me read. So you're going to read it." So I did. But it's a phenomenal book and I encourage everyone to read it. But there's some very sage words of wisdom and very short, concise patterns in the book. And one of which is, because many people believe that the freedom movement, that all was lost. Oh my goodness, the hundreds of emails I got this past week or past couple weeks about, maybe it's in the thousands, I don't know, about how all was lost and everybody was wringing their hands and their hair was on fire and why people continue to watch the bought-off lamestream fake media, and that includes Fox News, is beyond me. I've warned you for a decade about Fox, that they're controlled opposition. Obviously, a lot of people didn't believe me or decided that they were going to essentially self-inflict themselves with this damage. But all this hand-wringing and hair on fire and people, it's all over and it's... Stop. They thought it was all over for General Flynn too, didn't they? And what did I tell you from the very beginning? That he was an innocent man and he would prevail. And what happened? Yeah, there were some choke points, with Sullivan, even though the Department of Justice dropped the case against him and Sullivan refused to do his constitutional duty. By the way, Sullivan should be impeached, the judge. Hopefully that'll happen in President Trump's second term early on. That will occur, that he will have, that they will seek the impeachment of Judge Emmett Sullivan. But General Flynn is a free man. Now, obviously, if it were not for Sidney Powell, that undoubtedly would not have happened. But he's a free man. So at times when people believe that things are so terrible and we're weak, I take you to Sun Tzu. Please remember this. Because at a minimum, maybe it'll stop these incessant emails I get about how how we're losing. No, we're winning. And if you don't believe that, then you are not cognizant of the facts that are occurring, and you're buying into what the bought-off lamestream fake media is spewing. Here's what Sun Tzu said, quote, "Appear weak when you are strong, and strong when you are weak," end quote. Please remember that. Please remember that. So I believe if you mark the date down in your history books that November 25th, 2020 was the modern day equivalent of December 25th, 1776, the night General Washington crossed the Delaware. There are some people that might laugh at you right now. But in a year, or a decade, or in 100 years, you will be proven correct. You see, I truly believe, folks, the totalitarian deep state was defeated on Wednesday, November 25th, 2020. And I realize 99% of the public does not realize that fact yet. But they will soon. Freedom was the victor across the board and across our country. Well, give me some examples, Dave. Give me some examples of how well we won the war against this evil enemy. And the deep state is evil. The totalitarian thugs. All right? 1, General Flynn, an innocent patriot, was issued a pardon of innocence. He is now back on the battlefield. That's huge. 2, Sidney Powell dropped the legal equivalent of a Moab. What's a Moab? A mother of all bombs. She dropped legal Moabs late Wednesday, November 25th, on the states of Georgia and Michigan, which will destroy and out the election fraud perpetrated by the deep state. The deep state, and I use this term on several fronts, hammered President Trump and altered the scorecard. So the deep state sock puppet basement Joe Biden would be coronated the president-elect. Remember, nobody's the president-elect until December 14th when the electors move. And if they can't come to a decision, then it goes to the House of Representatives. And you might say, that's a problem. Well, if you're a student at Operation Freedom University and one of our subscribers, you'll know that actually plays in our hands. State delegations are in the majority related to the Republican Party, and they are obligated to vote for the Republican candidate. So we had 1, General Flynn being issued a pardon of innocence. 2, Sidney Powell dropping those legal Moabs. 3, Attorney Lynn Wood won a victory in the 11th Circuit, which led to a hearing to the legitimacy and a questioning of the Georgia vote. All this on November 25th. Oh, but it goes on. There was devastating testimony before the Pennsylvania Senate, in Gettysburg no less, which was led by Rudy Giuliani and his team on the vote fraud in Pennsylvania. The witnesses were courageous and they were superb. And they articulately dissected how the election was stolen in Pennsylvania, or attempted to be stolen by the deep state to hammer President Trump. In addition, there was a Pennsylvania court that stopped the certification of the vote in Pennsylvania. And then the Supreme Court stepped up in a 5-4 decision. You know that Roberts went the wrong way, of course. Why? Because he's controlled by the deep state. Why? Because of their control mechanism of illegal surveillance through the hammer. And we've talked about that before. But the Supreme Court, with Justice Amy Coney Barrett, stuffed Andrew Cuomo on religious freedom. Yeah. As far as General Flynn, I want to read to you a note I sent to him and his family. It has ended after 4 long years. Team Flynn has defeated the enemy personified by pure evil. Each of you and the entire Flynn family have been incredible role models for millions of Americans in perseverance, dedication, sacrifice, courage, and patriotism. Without your leadership, our country would have been lost to totalitarianism. November 25th, in fact, was the crossing of the Delaware, the 2020 version. And now, on to the Battle of Trenton. By confronting evil and shining the light of truth on the enemy, you have inspired every freedom-loving American to stand up against injustice and totalitarianism. Team Flynn is the force behind our upcoming victory in setting the election results straight, the second term of President Trump, and the ultimate defeat of the deep state. I thank God for each and every one of you and all that you have done to save our country. Thoughts and prayers. Happy Thanksgiving. Dave. And then, folks, what we did on last Sunday, I did my Thanksgiving Day message. And what I did is we put that up on YouTube. Please go there. Share it. Because it's a message about what the real Thanksgiving is about capitalism and free markets, and how they are the salvation as opposed to the oppression through socialism and communism. I encourage you to go to YouTube, the Operation Freedom channel, and network that presentation to anyone and everyone you know. Sidney Powell, an incredible warrior, dropped, as I mentioned, 2 legal Moabs, one at 12:15 in the morning on Thanksgiving morning on Georgia, and at 12:30 in the morning on Michigan. And the fraud that was perpetrated to try to steal the election on behalf of the sock puppet basement Joe Biden. Those lawsuits are the cornerstone for the overturning of the results and the nullification of the election and the attempted new coup of President Trump and of our country. I encourage you to go to Sidney's website, defendingtherepublic.org. Defendingtherepublic.org. Both lawsuits are highlighted on the front page of that site. And I know times are tough, but if you can financially do so, I encourage you to make a donation to her legal team so they can continue their ongoing fight for freedom and liberty on your behalf, your family's behalf, and the future of our country. DefendingTheRepublic.org. I want to take you to a review of Sidney's 2 lawsuits, a brief review, because you're not going to get it through the bought-off lamestream fake media. That includes Fox, okay? This from Zero Hedge. The fraud was executed by many means. Quote from Sidney Powell. Sidney Powell releases the Kraken with dual lawsuits in Michigan and Georgia. As we have outlined, the Kraken is a mythical, from Greek mythology. Zeus unleashes this sea serpent, if you will, this horrendous adversary to kill everything in its wake. That's part of what Kraken is. The subscribers to DaveJanda.com know that there's another side to what Kraken is all about. And it goes much deeper than a sea serpent. This from Zero Hedge. Sidney Powell has finally released the Kraken, filing 2 lawsuits in Michigan and Georgia late on November 25th, alleging massive schemes to rig the election for Joe Biden. In Georgia, Powell claims in a 104-page complaint filed in the U.S. District Court in Atlanta that the purpose of the scheme was, quote, illegally and fraudulently manipulating the vote count to make certain the election of Joe Biden as president of the United States, end quote. Quote, old-fashioned ballot stuffing has been, quote, amplified and rendered virtually invisible by computer software created and run by domestic, can you say CIA, and foreign actors for that very purpose. The suit continues, adding that mathematical and statistical anomalies rising to the level of impossibilities, as shown by affidavits of multiple witnesses, documentation, and expert testimony, evince this scheme across the state of Georgia, end quote. Quote, this scheme and artifice to defraud affected tens of thousands of votes in Georgia alone and rigged the election in Georgia for Joe Biden, end quote. The suit asked for over a dozen remedies, including an injunction blocking the state's certified results in which Biden won supposedly by 12,000 votes from being transmitted to the Electoral College. Powell's suit also demands an audit where signatures are matched, the impounding of various election machines, and video surveillance from vote counting areas. In Michigan, Powell filed a 75-page complaint seeking to set aside the results of the election, claiming that, quote, hundreds of thousands of illegal, ineligible, duplicate, or purely fictitious ballots, end quote, enabled by, quote, massive election fraud, end quote, facilitated Biden's win in the state of Michigan. Quote, the scheme and artifice of defraud was for the purpose of illegally and fraudulently manipulating the vote count to manufacture an election of Joe Biden as president of the United States, the suit alleges, adding that the most troubling and insidious and egregious ploy involves systemic adaptation of old-fashioned ballot stuffing. As Mimi Nagin Lee of the Epoch Times notes, quote, the complaint alleged, quote, an especially egregious range of conduct, and quote, in Wayne County and the city of Detroit and similar conduct throughout the state, which it attributed to direction from Michigan state election officials. Oh. It noted that the same pattern of election fraud and voter fraud writ large occurred in all the swing states with only minor variations in Pennsylvania, Arizona, and Wisconsin. The complaint cited eyewitness and expert testimony to allege that there were enough ballots identified to overturn and reverse the election results. It also said results of the election cannot be relied upon because the entire election process was riddled with fraud, illegality, and statistical impossibility. The suit claimed that election software and hardware from Dominion voting systems used by the Michigan Board of Canvassers helped facilitate the fraud. Quote, the Dominion systems derived from the software designed by Smartmatic Corporation, which became Sequoia in the United States, the complaint reads, Smartmatic and Dominion were founded by foreign oligarchs and dictators to ensure computerized ballot stuffing and vote manipulation to whatever level was needed to make certain Venezuelan dictator Hugo Chavez never lost another election. It added citing a whistleblower's affidavit alleging that the Smartmatic software was used to manipulate Venezuela elections in favor of Chavez. A core requirement of the Smartmatic software design ultimately adopted by the Dominion for Michigan elections was the software's ability to hide its manipulation of votes from any audit, the complaint alleged. The complaint cited a former electronic intelligence analyst under the 305th Military Intelligence Battalion who declared that the Dominion software was accessed by agents acting on behalf of China and Iran to monitor and manipulate elections, including the 2020 U.S. general election. But you knew that on November 1st that this was going to happen when General Tom McInerney came on Operation Freedom and spoke about that, folks. About Hammer and Scorecard and how the deep state were going to use those entities to electronically give the election to basement Joe Biden. You knew that 2 days before it happened. I go on. Another part of the complaint said that a former U.S. military intelligence expert had analyzed the Dominion software system and concluded that the system and software, quote, were certainly compromised by rogue actors such as Iran and China, end quote. By using servers and employees connected with the rogue actors and hostile foreign influences combined with numerous easily discoverable leaked credentials, Dominion neglectfully allowed foreign adversaries to access data and intentionally provide access to their infrastructure. Can you say Hammer and Scorecard? In order to monitor and manipulate elections, including the most recent one in 2020, end quote, the filing said. And there you have it, folks. And the bought-off, lamestream, fake media will never touch any of that information, including Fox. Why? Because they are all tentacles of the deep state. That deep state that wanted to strip you of your freedoms, of your liberties, to live with a mask on the rest of your life, and to live in fear the rest of your life. That is the dark winter that Joe Biden was talking about. I take you to another quote from Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin. Quote, I consider it completely unimportant who in the party will vote or how. But what is extraordinarily important is this: who will count the votes and how, end quote.